Been a little while, huh? I could speak about how busy I am, but so are you guys, so I won't waste any time. There's been some more stuff going on behind the scenes with Purgaliminal since we last talked, and being 100% honest, I haven't been the most active in the community. So if I get some things wrong, please let me know and I can correct them in the next one. From what I can tell, the video game has officially begun production, and Breadman has really focused on the educational tapes, which I honestly want to run through the main lore as fast as possible because those are real informative videos. But they really only make sense in the context of the main story. So for now, we'll have to keep trucking. No complaints here. I genuinely do want to keep making these videos, and I hope they're as enjoyable to watch as they are to make. And while I've been gone, it seems Breadman has really doubled down and cut my workout for me. So it's only right we do our best to make sense of it. Let's get going. Episode 8 is one of the most informative and fast-paced episodes we've seen so far. I will let this video play in its entirety. As fast-paced as this episode is, it is one of the most informative we've seen yet. This is one of the few instances we see a genuine timeline being used. Someone says, 3 years later and the beasts still roam. While this is incredibly vague, Purgaliminal has given very little indication as to the way time passes in its universe. Obviously, there's still a very human element to the world if concepts such as years still measure time. Next, we see two characters known as Watchdog 1 and Watchdog 2. These entities have canine-like bodies with human heads, and wear hats similar to the custodian helmet, a helmet commonly worn by the London police in the early 20th century. We pick up an interaction with these creatures seemingly in the middle of a conversation. They ask us if we remember, and since us, the audience, wasn't there to see what they really referred to, we can only assume of what the event in question could be. We suddenly cut to a large dirigible-like entity floating overhead, most likely a memory. The two dogs tell us, "That hit us pretty hard," and follow that with, "We are waiting on the higher-ups for our next orders." I think it's safe to assume that at one point these are British police officers that either turn to the creatures we see, or they appear to be actively a part of a functioning police force, and go on to use language that would indicate they believe they are still on the job. It's possible they haven't received orders in 3 years, and are simply too altered to understand that their orders prior to any reality shift no longer take any meaning. After leaving the encounter, we are contacted by something unknown. Its text box appears in the center of the screen, telling us to stop ignoring it. It also includes pictures of a wide, smiling mouth. It appears to hate us for ignoring it. The next text appears in the bottom right of the screen. This indicates to me that it's a different entity, on top of the tone being much more advisory in telling us our presence is known. We then see exactly who is taking notice of us, in the form of a quick cutscene stating, "A bishop scout has spotted you. Take caution." Before episode 8 ends, we see a sprawling ruins with familiar entities all around, followed by what appears to be almost a corrupted version of Greyman.exe, telling us to smile more. Possibly one of the most interesting bits of dialogue up to this point, as all prior .exe entities have had no mouth, and any emotion given off by their eyes is extremely deadpan. It seems that an expression of joy, or maybe even any emotion at all, is viewed as a negative thing. Those who have helped us are extremely deadpan. Those who have obstructed us seem to be almost overflowing with emotion in some cases. Judging by the look of the entity, it doesn't seem to have great intentions. The entirety of this episode can almost be viewed as a cutscene in itself. This concludes episode 8, and in my book, this is one of the most fast-paced episodes yet. The beginning of episode 9 starts with us having a conversation with an entity resembling those inhabiting the nature scene at the end of the last one. Our HP and power points seem to not just be 0, but null. 0 out of 0. Our status being voided, seemingly a symptom of this. The entity explains that we are currently in an adjacent dimension as his residence has been inhabited by some tumorous floating growth. Watching the growth leave the home as an action uses a transition into our next scene. It's unclear how much time has passed and in which direction, but the entity is seen floating from left to right off-screen. While our HP and power points have changed design, it's still seemingly completely null along with our status being alone. There's a phone booth in frame, and let's see what happens when the player attempts to use it. When the entity of familiar shape appears and tells us how truly alone we are, it's clear that this is another universe fully uninhabited. I'm inclined to believe that the entity isn't dangerous, as he appears to cry for our sake before getting transmitted once again. This time in the attempt to load our encountered entity, the creature is corrupted and seemingly appears in a semi-tangible state. He tells us, quote, "I've heard whispers that the ones from the walls are back," before he himself is transmitted, possibly by the vague ones from the walls? Also, mid-transition, our status turns to tubular. It's hard to apply meaning to most of the scenes we just watched, not because there's none to gather, but because in the grand scheme, I don't think really anything is learned. However, there is something big here. On principle, having your player info bar be an entity in itself is just a dope concept, but in terms of gameplay, it could impact the entirety of the series up to this point and beyond. For one, the player info in general has returned to somewhat normalcy, full health and full power, along with the hlurbed status. It's possible the player info bar is only a true entity when you yourself as a player are made tangible. It's also made clear that the person asking us not to ignore them was the status bar in the first place. One more thing to mention is that we can now consider the player to have a companion of sorts with them. And I don't know about you, but being truly alone in this universe is probably not the best option. This is the end of Chapter 9, but it's important to note that the Purgaliminal universe is inherently chaotic. There are very few moments of structure, so when something as concrete as the tumorous growth correlating with the emptiness of a space, you should keep your eye on it. Also, interestingly, Episode 10 is a re-upload of Episode 9, just starting with the HUD encounter. We will move to Episode 11 as we've already seen this. It's understood that in the past we have seen point-and-click elements, but never to the extent of options we seemingly have here. It's good to note that a lot of the choices lead to dead ends either narratively or literally, so it's possible this is just the illusion of choice. Also, the aesthetic of this location obviously screams school, but the cross upon the head of the entity telling us we aren't welcome indicates that some form of religion persists, even if it's just in the form of imagery. That was all of Episode 12, and it's one of the first combat sequences we've had in a while, and it's a fight against an entity of similar form to the one we saw in the school of the last episode. A detail I noticed is the player choosing advice over information on our main antagonist. This could be an attempt to keep the entity friendly by not imposing any hard questions, but as we see it's fruitless. Our health and power points no longer have a max stat range as well. I would assume using psychic abilities would decrease your power points, but they are seemingly unaffected. I'm inclined to believe we will see this entity again, as this is already not our first time seeing an entity of this form. That concludes our analysis for today. I urge all of you to give your input in the comments, as like I said, the Purgaliminal universe is inherently chaotic. The best advice I can give for trying to truly come to any conclusion is to simply use your human instinct. The chaotic nature of the universe results in any form of structure sticking out like a sore thumb. I cling to that, and will continue to do so until it leads me astray. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and there'll be more to come. Hopefully not so long between parts, but life and whatnot, you know. Till next time. Peace.